What is up, everybody? Welcome to this Trainwreck Sports podcast, and we are here to pay the bills. Presented by Picasso's Pizza. Jake Micah here, joined by Carson Hayek, and we are here to talk some Buffalo Bills football. As always, Carson, we're both dealing with intense heat. You down in Olean, New York, me here in Chicago, Illinois. We're battling through the elements though,
Yes, we
and,
are.
and showing some grit, some perseverance as we come into the season. How you doing today, buddy?
I'm doing phenomenal. New setup here, obviously. So it'll be the first pod in college we got going on here, but I'm looking forward to it. And let's talk some Bills. There's a lot going on today.
Lot going on today. Yeah. Shout out to you, Carson, your first week at school. I'm sure a lot of our viewers, including myself, incredibly jealous of you starting on this experience. So enjoy it, man. Enjoy it. But I'm glad that you've taken time out of your busy syllabus week to talk some Bills football with us. So the big news of the day, obviously, we're going to get right into it here. The big news of the day is the roster cut down. We have a 53-man roster. I wanted to, and I was listening to Sal earlier on WGR, and he made a great point. Like, this is obviously the 53-man, but there's never really a final roster. So I didn't want to say the final 53-man. This could change tomorrow for all we know. There's going to be a lot of guys waived. We don't know what the Bills are interested in. They made some interesting moves today too, which we're going to get into. So I'm going to bring it up. If you're watching along on YouTube here, that I'm going to bring this up on the screen, that we have the full list of players that were released today. If it will share to the screen. All right, here we go. So as you can see on this list, 27 players released today. I'm not going to read through all the names here. Some of the big names, Ben DiNucci gone after this short stint. Some of the camp favorites, Zach Davidson, Frank Gore, Andy Isabella, a favorite from last year, KJ Hamler pouring one out for my guy KJ, and the biggest surprise of the day, probably Daquan Hardy, Kingsley Jonathan cut, Trey McKitty, Tyrell Shavers, maybe the other big surprise of the day, Gable Stevenson, not a surprise, but a big name getting cut. Kendall Williamson had a good camp, didn't make it. Deshaun Williams, among other names. Will Clapp obviously brought in, Leo Collins brought in to fortify the offensive line. They get cut. I'm basically going through all the names that I said I wasn't going to. Eli Anku is going to be back on the practice squad. And then a lot of guys that we kind of expected to get moved. Was there a move that surprised you the most, Carson? Out of any of these moves, cuts today, what kind of took you by surprise?
I mean, like, I get the Bills kept 5 wide receivers last year, and it wasn't a problem. But I really thought Tyrell Shavers, he was a guy who could slide into that wide receiver 6 role, probably being inactive on the game day. But I thought he was a guy who'd at least be serviceable if needed. I'm kind of surprised to see him go. Zach Davidson, I wouldn't say surprises me, but, I mean, he had a great camp. If, he can slide through the waiver wire a bit, which I think he will. He'll probably end up on that practice squad. Same with KJ Hamler, versatile player. Probably a guy who ends up on the practice squad. But I'd say the main one is Daquan Hardy. I mean, he was a guy who we thought, okay, he's going to be the return this year. He flashed a little bit in the preseason, had a pretty decent camp. And as of like 4:30, all of a sudden, boom, here comes the trade. Brandon Codrington from the Jets. He's going to be a returner this year. Basically, same role as Hardy. He's a corner. Is his main position on defense, and then obviously he's going to be used as a returner, and there goes Hardy. So, I mean, we'll have to see. I think there might be a team that could end up taking a chance on Hardy, draft pick guy with a lot of versatility, good returner, and there's some upside there. So we'll have to see, but I'd say that's probably the one that got me today. What about you?
Hardy is the biggest shock to me. There was some rumblings. I believe it was Joe Marino earlier who mentioned that Hardy could be dealing with a nagging injury and that maybe he was going to get put on the IR or something like that start of the season. Obviously, he gets cut outright. I believe, in my opinion, I think he's going to get brought. I think he wants to come back. He's going to go to the practice squad, understands his point, his spot there. I mean, at least that's what I would imagine with him, because it was so weird that they were giving him a prominent role returning. He, from all accounts, was flashing at the slot position behind Taron Johnson as good depth. But you see two guys that made this roster, Cam Lewis, who's not a surprise at all with how much they've trusted him, his versatility at safety and playing the corner position. But Marcus Ingram making the team too, and really solidifying that he can play inside and outside, but solidifying that backup slot role, I think, behind Taron Johnson and showing out there. I think it made them look at Hardy and be like, okay, Well, if he's not better than these two guys that we have at corner that can play there, and are we really going to keep him as just a returner, or do we think that Bodrington is just the better option as a returner? And the guy had a better preseason as a return. He had bigger returns. He showed some more explosiveness. Now Hardy showed explosiveness too, but if we're comparing the two, Hardy didn't have as good of a summer. So if that's what we're talking about, and that's a guy who's going to be mostly a kick returner, and the Bills cut their two guys that we thought could be returners in Hamler and Hardy going into it, the move makes more sense, but it's just confusing to see the role that they gave him and the opportunity they gave him to just cut him. So I'm interested to see what the practice squad ends up, and if he's a guy that would end up right there and, kind of got an understanding, wink, wink, nod, like, you will be a guy that is used on our roster this year. You're going to play games. We're going to put you on the practice squad now. We think you can still do some developing, but we think we can develop you. Because if you're a young corner, you want to play for Sean McDermott. Like, that's just facts. So I'm interested to see where that goes. It was still shocking, though, to see Hardy. Hamler was more of a, like, I wanted him to make it. I'm not surprised, Shavers was surprising. I think he'll be a guy again, back on the practice squad, a guy who will get a lot of playing time as the year goes on. Even Hamler, I think, will be a guy that gets brought back on the practice squad too. I think those will be two receivers that get brought on for that kind of depth, and will have opportunities to get called up to the main roster the entire year. But yeah, like you said, I know last year they ran with 5 receivers, but we talked about 6 all summer long, just thinking it would be, nice to have an option on there. But when you look at the 5 that they ended up with, we're just talking receivers here. When we got Coleman, Shakir, Samuel, MVS, and Hollins, that 6th guy was never really going to play over any of those guys, the way that it's bore out. And there's a lot of chatter about MVS. I don't really love MVS either.
Neither do I.
And it is what it is, right? But he was guaranteed $2.5 million, and he's a veteran guy in that group and everything.
Oh boy. Oh boy, where did we go here, Jake?
I don't know.
There he is.
I just got kicked out. Got the little sad face from StreamYard, but we're back.
We are back.
MVS, it makes sense to have a guy like MVS as the security of a guy that just is a vet and isn't gonna, like, that's a young room, right? Like, we're counting on Shakir, who is only in his second year. Why am I blanking?
Third. I want to say third.
Third year is obviously the biggest role he's coming into. Rookie, you're depending a lot on him. Kincaid, as much hype as there is around Dalton Kincaid coming in this year, only his second year. So you're relying, like, those are the 3 guys that you're hoping are your best receivers on this team, and they're all within the first 3 years of their career. It makes sense to want a guy that's just been around. And as much as MVS had a lot of drops and had a lot of like drops, especially on national TV, like you saw the Monday Night Football thing and everything else. Clearly a guy that Patrick Mahomes liked to have around, a guy that Aaron Rodgers liked to have around, and that guy that this team, Allen and Joe Brady and everything else, have praised in camp too. So he does something right in that locker room and just on the field and his work ethic and everything, that it makes sense to keep him around. Fans aren't going to like it. He's definitely going to have some bad drops in some games, but that's where we're at with that receiver room. Is there anything else that surprised you? Like, like you mentioned Davidson, and that's a tough one, but Morris offers more special teams ability. That makes sense. Frank Gore is going to be back on this practice squad. He wasn't making it over the running backs they currently had. I'm happy to see Lyle Collins go. I think he's been washed for years now and didn't like the sign to begin with. Kingsley Jonathan probably brought back on the practice squad, but he wasn't making it over to Solomon. The way Solomon splashed this year, the pedigree that he had coming into it, and being a draft pick this year. Like, is there anything else that surprised you, or does this look good to you?
I mean, it's all stuff I expected. Like,
yeah,
it's difficult because you kind of know who's coming in, and then, like I talked about last week, it's all about making Brandon Beane think. Last week particularly, I don't know if he really had to think about anyone in particular, So It's all what I expected today. Besides the Daquan Hardy and I'd say Tyrell Shavers. If you were to ask me that this morning, I'd say chances were they were both probably on the roster, and they're not. So I mean, they'll likely be on the practice squad here in the coming days, and I think we'll retain them. So I mean, I'll be more than happy with that if we can retain them. I know they're subject to possible getting picked up by other teams if we're on the practice squad, but let's be honest, there's more talented guys in the world than both of them. They still have some potential to go before I think teams would really claim them. But not to say it hasn't happened. And obviously, best of luck to all the guys who got cut today. So hope they do
For
well.
sure. Sad day, like roster cut down. A sad day in a lot of ways. Like this is a lot for the guys that we're talking about. Like, there's going to be some guys that make the roster, but some guys that maybe never play in the NFL again or never have another chance to. So shout out to them. Like, hopefully they find a spot and can find a good place to continue their career, whether it's in the NFL, on a practice squad, CFL, the XFL. You know, there's a lot of more options for guys now that are fringe NFL players. So hopefully it works out the best for them. But yeah, I'm not – everything else here, not a surprise. We'll see what happens tomorrow. Specifically, let's start from there. The last thing we'll touch on with the roster before we move on to some other topics. What are you looking for tomorrow? If there's a move that you think the Bills make off the waivers, is there a guy? Is there a position that you're looking for them to add to? And I know we kind of mentioned this last week, but now we're down nitty gritty when waivers go tomorrow and teams got to make their claims.
I'd say if there was a specific guy, it's got to be Noah Brown, right? I mean, the guy he's always, it seemed like he's banged up, but he, even going back to Dallas a little bit, I mean, the guy could play. He goes Houston 2 years ago. I want to say he puts up 500-600 yards in a spot that he was very limited. When he did play, he was really good. Then he battled through some injuries, was out a majority, I believe, of last season. And obviously Houston's fallen out of favor. They have a stacked wide receiver room with Diggs, Tank Dell, Nico Collins, and guys like that. Robert Woods is in there. So, I mean, there's plenty of talent in that room. I think he was just the odd guy out. And I think Noah Brown is serviceable on at least half of the teams in the NFL. I think automatically he's probably better than Valdez-Scantling, if not Mac Hollins. And I'm a Mac Hollins fan. I've stated that before, but I think Noah Brown's a guy who can come and contribute easily. Kadarius Toney, you have to throw his name out there, right? Like we have that role filled, but he's a guy I wouldn't mind to at least give a chance maybe at that sixth spot. And then I guess at safety, like Lewis signed. We expected him to get cut. He ended up did getting cut. The Bills interviewed him in his draft year, so there was some interest there at that point in time. And I'd say if we're going to go back to this backup quarterback conversation, which I don't think they're actually going to pick anyone up because Trubisky's probably going to be fine week one, but maybe Desmond Ridder. I mean, he's a guy who's played a ton of snaps in college. He had a few plays that made you really, really think, okay, there could be something there in Atlanta the past year and a half. And then obviously things didn't work out for Arizona. He gets beat out by Clayton Tune, which is not a great look at all.
No.
But who knows? So it all depends on the health of Trubisky in that category. But Ridder, I think, and Trubisky are in the same category. I think I'd rather have Trubisky personally. But we'll have to see. I mean, Brandon Beane's been known to pick up a guy or two here and there after the cuts. So maybe one of those guys, or it could be one of them, huh?
Yeah, the Ridder thing's interesting to me because I mean, him losing out to Tune is definitely a bad look down there. But still a guy, like you said, played some snaps and has some experience. I'm interested in the Browns quarterback situation where they were fielding offers for Jameis Winston. I would rather take Jameis Winston over Mitch Trubisky. And the Bills didn't lose a pick today when they traded for Bodgington. They just swapped late round picks, and it was 2026 too. So I would throw a 6th or 7th round pick for Jameis Winston. I'd rather have him as a backup than Mitch, honestly. But if they think Mitch is healthy enough, I think he's just going to play week one and go there forever. I'm interested in the Noah Brown scenario. I don't like Mac Hollins as much as you. Don't like MVS. But are they going to bring a guy in off the street to take wide receiver 4 and kind of throw off that room? I don't know. And maybe the part of the decision was to keep all these guys around was the quarterback and where Allen feeling comfortable with all these guys. And he's sung high praises about each and every one of his receivers. So we'll see what happens. And we have to remember about the receiver room is that Dalton Kincaid is going to be wide receiver 1. And James Cook is going to be probably the second most used and targeted weapon, whether it be carries or hopefully catching balls out of the backfield. Hopefully he's addressed the drops and hit the jugs machine this summer. But those two guys like could be top 5, top 10 at their position in the league this year, and that's going to help out the wide receiver room a ton. So we'll see what happens. Let's get into some AFC East talk, Carson, because now where are we at? 9 days away from the season starting in Kansas City. And we have not really talked any preview stuff. We'll get into some of that next week. We've kept it mostly Bills related here, camp related, everything else as we got back into it here, get into the podcast when training camp started. But the AFC East, I was spurred on by this because I finally looked at the division odds today. And right now, I just got to show you this because this is crazy to me. Hold on. Let me get this up on our screen here. Sorry, podcast listeners. This is me producing in real time. Intern took a break. Even though it says intern Carson on the screen, he's not the intern for the night. And I think you might be able to lose that, honestly. But hey, if you want to keep the intern thing, keep going. I respect it, Carson. Look at this, though. There are a lot of books here. FanDuel, the Jets, the favorite in the division at plus 160. The Bills plus 195. MGM here plus 160 for the division. Bills plus 180. Very close on ESPN bet with the plus 175 and plus 185. Jets at Caesars are the favorite. At DraftKings, they're the favorite. The only books that the Bills are the favorites in the AFC East are Bally and Bet Rivers right now. Now it's very slight. Could change before the season starts. But what's going on here, Carson? Do you and this is going to be me starting with just the Jets. And how do you feel about the Jets going into this year? Are you that concerned that they're a threat in the AFC East? And how do you feel about an Aaron Rodgers coming off an Achilles? Because I think you could go any end of the spectrum and be right. Like today, Mike Greenberg said Aaron Rodgers and the Jets are the biggest threat to the Chiefs in the NFL. I think there's a case you could say to make that. Sure. I also think there's a case to say that this offense is run by Nathaniel Hackett.
Yep.
It has Garrett Wilson, it has Breece Hall, great weapons. Also has Mike Williams, who's always hurt. It has a not great offensive line, and it has a great defense. Yes, but Robert Saleh has shown up small in a lot of big moments and a lot of big games defensively. So I think there's arguments to be made for both sides. So what do you think about the Jets going into this year?
I mean, I was actually asked this question from a guy on campus, like my second day. It's like, who do you have winning the East? And do you think the Bills are going to be good this year? I'm like, well, they're going to be good. I don't think they're going to be great. I think they're going to be a 10-7 team. And then the second part of that question, I go, if there's a team that's going to win the division, I'll be honest, I think it is the Jets. And I think they'll win it this year is my prediction. But, I mean, I compare them to almost the Sabres in a way that the fact that they need so many things to add up to be good, because you have Rodgers, who he's a guy who hasn't played in 2 years, and the last season he did actually play. Let's be honest, he wasn't Aaron Rodgers, good quarterback, nothing great. So when you stack that on top of an Achilles injury last season, which he thinks he came back from, but let's be honest, it's an Achilles. It's one of the most serious ones that you can have in sports. I don't know how good he's actually going to be. Topple that with Nathaniel Hackett, he's calling the plays. Let's be honest, he didn't do a great job last year. It's kind of surprising he got the job this year, and there was no change, especially in a front office and a coaching staff that seems like they are dangling towards the edge of getting fired. So, I mean, their defense is going to be really, really good. However, like you said, in moments that they needed to show up, like with Robert Saleh, they have not consistently. They overall, the phenomenal defense, one of the best in the league. The floor on that team is pretty high. The ceiling is also pretty high. But I do think the Jets are gonna win the division, but they are like 2 or 3 things away from their season derailing and the Jets being the Jets again and finishing 4th in the division or 3rd, even though that floor is high. This is a competitive division because, I mean, the Dolphins, they're always going to be there because they got some true talent on offense. The coaching staff is at least manageable. I think the only team that's really out of it this year is the Patriots, and that's because they're rebuilding, obviously, new quarterback and new staff, and they're just not there yet. So I'd say the floor for the Jets, realistically, third seed, they go like 7-10. But I could see that team being 13-4 as well if everything goes right. Aaron Rodgers is, fighting age, and he's phenomenal again, and he's in the reign for a possible MVP. But I mean, the Bills can definitely win this division. I think it's anyone's to win besides the Patriots. So it doesn't surprise me that the Jets are favored here in some of these odds.
So you're gonna pick the Jets to win this division?
Yes, I picked the Jets to win the AFC this year.
Okay, I don't think that's crazy, man. Like I'm not asking you that to be like, oh man, Carson, what the hell are you talking about? I think that's perfectly fair, because if Roger, now the Achilles is the biggest thing. Like you said, one of the worst injuries to come back from, especially at his advanced age. We've seen very varied results across different sports on how people respond from an Achilles, but luckily for Rodgers, is being a quarterback, I feel like, is one of the easiest injuries to come back from if you have a healthy Achilles. Now, maybe he's not as mobile as he usually has been, right? Like, and that was one of Rodgers, at least in his prime, one of his biggest assets. Not that he was like, Lamar or Josh running around like crazy, but he could make plays out in space. He would go take off for some long runs in games. I don't think we're going to see that, and he shouldn't be doing that. Even last year at 39 years old, he probably didn't want to be doing that as much as he would usually done. So especially this year. So how much is the mobility affected? But does that matter when you have Aaron Rodgers in that arm and the brain that he has and the weapons that he has around him? As long as that thing can hold up, as long as it's not a thing where, week 2, he has a calf strain and they have to start sitting him out and Tyrod's playing. And it's like, okay, like maybe not like a disastrous injury right away, but that Achilles wasn't fully healed and it's affecting, his ankle and his calf and his hamstring and everything else that it can affect in that lower leg. Like that's what would worry me if I was a Jets fan, and that O-line, which I think the O-line is the weakest part of their team still.
100%.
And if he's getting hit, or if he's scared to get hit and getting rid of the ball early and all this other stuff, their offense is not going to flow the way they want it to. And we don't know what this offense is going to look like with the Hackett situation and everything else, but we never got to see him working with Rodgers at all. Like we got 4 plays, right? Like that's all we got to see, and that everybody knows that. So it's basically a starting fresh, and you have to think of the Achilles in the back of your mind. But if he steps out there, if he gets through the first quarter, like say he goes, that first quarter Monday Night Football in San Francisco, and he's, 5 for 8 for 75 yards and a touchdown or something, I'm not gonna be worried about him the rest of the year. Like that just is what it is. If I see him out there, slinging the ball around and doing Aaron Rodgers things from behind the center, maybe a little bit less mobile, but the arms there, the receivers are hitting. Mike Williams is looking good, healthy. Garrett Wilson gets a big splash play. They're going to be a scary team for the rest of the year. But it's just a lot of ifs with Rodgers until we see it. Not saying that he can't do it, but it's just like, man, like old quarterback coming off an Achilles, like you don't want to like. I wouldn't bet on it. That's for sure. That's the crazy thing that's the crazy thing about these odds to me, is that you're betting on that. Like, because the Bills were the favorites earlier in the summer and now it's obviously shifted. I wouldn't bet on him. I just don't think I don't think it's a safe bet to say that he does it, but I think it would be a safe prediction to do. If that makes sense.
I 100% agree. For money purposes and your return on investment, I'm betting the Bills. But if we're talking money's not on the table and who do you really think is going to win, I'd say probably the Jets, followed by the Bills, followed by the Dolphins, followed by the Patriots. The exact thing that's up on the screen, I'd say is relatively accurate to how I could see things playing out this season. If the Jets can stay healthy, the coaching staff doesn't self-sabotage, and, they don't become the Jets like in the past years.
And that's a hard thing for the Jets to do.
It is. It's very hard. Yeah.
The Dolphins, do you think there's a world where they win this division and they make the AFC Championship game?
AFC Championship, I mean, let's not get crazy, but like they definitely can win the division. They really, to be honest, they should have won it last year. It's just, if they don't have the collapse against Tennessee, I think they pull it out last year. And there's definitely a way they can win it this year. I think it's going to be harder for them too. This year, the teams have adjusted to the speed motions that they got going on. I mean, I think last year was a Dolphins year, honestly. I know that they had a decent offseason this year, but I think they could have peaked last year. But there's a way that it happens. They stay healthy. Tyreek Hill puts up another year where he's just phenomenal, which is likely to happen. Tua maybe takes a little bit of a step forward again. Waddle continues. He's got to stay healthy, but if he can continue to play like he has in the past, they'll be just fine. But the defense too, it's a little questionable with them sometimes. Like the talent is there, like on paper, but that's a defense that like Xavier Howard's gone. I know they got Ramsey still, but it's an uphill climb for the Dolphins. They can definitely do it, but I still like the Bills way more, and I like the Jets a little bit more than the Bills. So it's difficult for them.
Yeah, that defense scares me for sure. I think the offense will be able to put up numbers, but I also am wary of the fact that teams are going to have a year of tape on Tua and the offense with Tyreek and everything else, and find ways to kind of, cap off the explosive plays. And if they don't have explosives, I don't think this offense can move the ball down the field. I just don't. I think if you make Tua wait a half beat, he's
Bingo.
An average, below average quarterback.
Rhythm thrower. He's a rhythm thrower through and through.
Exactly. And it's hard to, it's amazing that they were as good as they were with him being that last year, because you don't see that in the NFL. Like you see that in college all the time with the way that he sets up. Tua, they really use one half of the field at all times. They were looking one way or the other on a lot of plays, a lot of routes and everything else. And it was just, they have extreme talent, extreme speed, and a genius play caller to make it happen. But I'm just wondering what the defenses do to kind of even it out this year. And I'm wary of that. I see the Dolphins as like a ceiling of like where they were last year, like 11-6, 10-7. And I don't see them being a team that could get to like 14-3, 13-4, but 11-6 could win this division too, depending on how the Bills and the Jets do too. So I'm with you there. I still think the Bills are the best bet though. If we're talking just from betting purposes, I would just bet on the best quarterback in that, and that's Josh Allen. There's a lot of questions around the Bills and everything else. I think with the one thing, and we'll talk about it more next week as we get into the Bills season next week. Next week, I think we're picking the Bills. I think that's going to be our show, is we're just going to do P the Bills, picks the Bills, and go through. But I think the biggest thing for me is I expect this defense to be good. There's no reason it shouldn't be. That Sean McDermott's never had a below average defense as long as he's been in Buffalo, and this defensive line is the best they've ever had. And I think that that's going to carry this Bills team a lot more than people are giving credit for going into the season. You can have all the questions about the secondary you want. I don't have that many questions about the secondary because it's, the big names between Poyer and Hyde leaving. I don't think there's going to be a big drop off with the safety group, because those guys were like, especially Micah Hyde, like on and off the field, just on and off the field, meaning like couldn't stay healthy health-wise on and off the field. And Poyer clearly lost a step of athleticism. Like it was it didn't mean that he was a bad player last year, but he was not all pro level like he had been the years before. I think the corner room, if Benford's healthy, corner room's as good as it's ever been. Like it really is. Like maybe not like Trey White was easily the best player they had there at his peak, but I think the depth and across the board with Johnson, Elam, if he can carry over a strong summer into the season, and Douglas kind of staying in his form, that's a great room. And we saw this linebacker core could be effective without Matt Milano last year. Like Terrell Bernard was a stud last year, another year of Williams. And again, with the Milano injury, if there's an injury, a guy you want to lose on your defense, it's the off-ball linebacker that Milano is at. So I think this defense is going to be really good again, and it's just up to the offense to kind of figure out their fits. And they've done it every year with Josh, regardless of who the group is. And last year, I think, was just it was a vibes problem as much as anything else. Like the cohesion across the board, a lot of forcing it to Diggs early in the year, which was it because Ken Dorsey wanted to do that? Was it because they were trying to keep him happy because there was friction in the locker room, which we've heard about now on? And then later in the year, clearly there was a de-emphasizing him and going to the kind of style that Joe Brady's going to run. How does that kind of manifest itself? So I think I'm okay with where the Bills are at, but like I said, that Jets ceiling could be pretty high. The Patriots. Any words on the Patriots? I don't know if we see Drake May at all this year. Anything? I think that defense will still be pretty stout, but I don't expect anything from this offense.
I mean, they haven't even named a quarterback yet. Like Jerod Mayo. I think he slipped up yesterday. I was watching a little bit of SportsCenter saying like Drake May's outperformed Jacoby Brissett, but I think he also realizes that it's not a win now type of moment for this team. I think Jacoby Brissett's going to be your guy in a line that seems to be a shell of its former self. They struggled last year. I think they're going to struggle again. Wide receivers, I mean, they don't really have anybody out there for Drake May to have success with as of right now. There's not a single wide receiver one on that team. So that's a problem. They know they're in a rebuilding phase. That's a team that I think at most probably wins 7 games this year. Probably looking at a top 5 pick in the draft next year to build around Drake May, assuming that he's going to be their franchise quarterback. I do think we end up seeing him probably after a bye week, or when all is said and done late in the season, barring a Jacoby Brissett injury. But I don't. There isn't much to talk about with them. They don't stand much of a chance this year, and I'm thrilled by that because screw the Patriots.
Exactly. They're paying glad to see it. If they're 3-14 this year, regardless, we'll be happy people. All right. We're going to finish up here with some Josh Allen talk because there's been 2 big articles that came out this week discussing the NFL quarterback landscape, and I want to get your take on it. First, The Athletic put out their QB tiers. Josh Allen was ranked 3rd among quarterbacks. The first quarterback, he was in tier 1, was 3rd among quarterbacks. Number 1, Patrick Mahomes, obviously. 50 tier 1 votes out of 50. No question there. Mm-hmm. Number 2, Joe Burrow. And then Josh Allen, 3rd. He had some tier 2 votes and 1 tier 3 vote from a guy who said the turnovers were just too much and put him in tier. That's there. That's with The Athletic. ESPN today put out their QB confidential from players. So The Athletic uses executives and coaches. This was players. Mahomes number 1, Lamar number 2, Burrow number 3, Allen number 4 among those quarterbacks. And then Josh Allen was also rated the most overrated quarterback in the league and also the biggest trash talker in the league. So any thoughts on any of that I just brought up to you there?
First of all, there is not a world where Joe Burrow is a better quarterback than Josh Allen. And I know why people say, at least the national media, and of course, they're going to, in reverse here, the Buffalo market is saying Josh is better. But the reason I think there's not a world Joe Burrow is better than Josh is because, well, I'll start with the national media. So the national media will point out, well, he wins the big games. Josh Allen does not win the big games. There's not a single player in the team, and on a team in this year, that the offense relies on them more than Josh Allen. Josh Allen is the Buffalo Bills. He runs the ball. He runs it for over 100 a game sometimes when the run game stalls out. He throws the ball for over 300. I mean, the offense runs through him in every facet. Joe Burrow, this guy starts every year. You're guaranteed for the first 3 games, you're guaranteed at least 5 interceptions out of him. He starts the year terrible every single year. And I'm not holding that against him because he wins the big games at the end of the day. So, but it's a team game. It's a team game. So I think Josh Allen hasn't had the support Joe Burrow's had. Burrow's got T. Higgins. He had Tyler Boyd. He has Jamar Chase. He's got guys all over the field. He had Joe Mixon. Mixon was better than any running back Josh Allen's had in his career besides the year James Cook had last season. So the support is already there. I think coaching-wise, Zach Taylor, I think it's tied between him and McDermott. Neither of them I'm that high on. As far as the most overrated player in the league, of course they're going to say that. As far as the player standpoint, I'm a little surprised by that. Fan bases, I'd understand them saying most overrated. He throws way too many interceptions, gives the ball up. All of his interceptions look stupid.
Which was the biggest impetus for the most overrated,
yes,
was the turnovers as well.
You're going to get that out of a guy who makes superhero-like plays every game. It's just how it's going to be. So for the players to say that does surprise me. For the fan base, if a fan base were to say that, no, not at all. So, I mean, Josh, in my opinion, he's the number 2 quarterback in the league. Maybe number 3 if you're going to throw a guy ahead of him. Maybe Lamar, I could kind of understand that. Maybe Jalen Hurts. But in my opinion, it's got to go Mahomes, Josh, and then have your choice between Joe Burrow, Brock Purdy, Lamar Jackson, Jalen Hurts. Like, it's Josh is 2. I'm done talking about it. Josh is the number 2 quarterback in the NFL.
I agree with you completely, and we can be homers on this podcast if we call us that, whatever else it is. I think you just watch the games week in and week out. Don't look at the counting stats of turnovers and everything else. It also a lot of the stats they use for the turnovers are like, oh, most since 2018. It's like, okay, like he's one of like 6 quarterbacks who have started since 2018 too. So like somebody has to have the most turnovers. So there's like things like that too that are very nitpicky when they're talking about Allen and everything else. But yeah, like you said, the superhero plays that he can make, I wouldn't put Lamar ahead of him because Lamar is not as good of a pure passer. Wouldn't
Correct.
put Burrow ahead of him because Burrow can't make something out of nothing like him. And that's the thing with Burrow is Burrow's had Jamar Chase and T. Higgins for the entirety of his career, basically. I mean, besides it's just crazy to talk about the weapons that Burrow has had, and also how much love they give him for going into Kansas City, winning that playoff game when it really wasn't him that did it. It was the defense that did it for them in that game. And since then, it hasn't been anything of note for the Bengals. So Burrow's been hurt the last couple of years, both seasons. So it's a lot of things off of reputation, I feel like, and projection for Burrow if he's healthy, and not what we've actually seen on the field. And I don't think Allen's going to have a year of turnovers like he did last year. Like, I just don't see that happening again. I think last year was a lot of forcing it for a lot of different reasons. And I think there's going to be a lot of turnovers. Don't get me wrong. But I don't think there's going to be as many. I think he's going to fluctuate where there's years where he doesn't have as many turnovers and years where he has a lot just by the nature of his play. I think that the trash talking and the overrated thing goes hand in hand because I think players just hate Josh Allen. Yeah. I think when I saw that he was the biggest, like, easily cleared in that thing, I'm like, okay, so these players just hate playing against this guy because he's talking shit the whole time. And it naturally goes into saying that he's the most overrated, and he's an easy target to say that he's overrated. Like, if there's anybody in the league that you could, like, it's him or Lamar that you could say if you wanted to about overrated, like that there's arguments about all the time, but Lamar has the MVPs to back it up, so he has more credence. Like with Allen, there's nothing accolade wise that you can fall back on in the argument. Like, he's never won the MVP, had only made it out of the division round one time. Like, all these things, there's all these knocks now against this Bills team that have just built up, and it's well deserved, right? Like, no shit, use what you can against a fan base and everything else. But yeah, I think that has a lot to do with it. I think that his play style and everything else has a lot to do with people saying that he's overrated. And I mean, I'm really excited to see what this man looks like this year. A refocus, re-energized, and fully, really the first year fully. I feel like that this is his team because I feel like it was him and Diggs for all those years. And even if Josh was like the leader in the locker room, it was always talking about the two of them as a cohesive unit, as a symbiotic relationship. So I'm interested to see what he does, kind of setting himself apart for the first time, not being young and not being attached to one receiver on that offensive side. It's really molded in his identity. So we'll see what happens. But Carson, anything else you want to mention on that?
I mean, like, as far as what you were saying, I just hope Josh realizes he doesn't have to do everything. There's been times where, like, he even with Diggs, he tries to take over the game in moments that I don't think he has to. And I think if he just plays smart football, plays how he plays, even with the superhero aspects, it's all about finding the happy medium. And for him, it's a really small happy medium. But he does not have to do everything. There's still talent on this football team. He's got an elite tight end in Dalton Kincaid. He's got a great running back in James Cook. And he's got depth at the wide receiver position that can win when needed, especially Khalil Shakir. So he doesn't have to do it all. Use his legs when needed. The run game should be, let's hope that it's good this year. The preseason didn't show much, but last year the run game was phenomenal. So I think there's pieces here that the offense can definitely work with, and it's Josh's year, man. It's his team. It's been his team. Now it's officially his team. So I'm excited for it.
Oh yeah, man! I can't wait. Next week when we're back here, we've paid the bills today, and next week we're back here, we're going to be previewing a real life NFL regular season football game and the whole season, and I can't wait. So we paid the bills. Shout out to Picasso's Pizza. My cats are trying to jump in front of the screen right now. I don't know what they see outside. Okay, we avoided disaster there. Shout out Picasso's Pizza. Get your pizza anywhere. Hey, ship that pizza anywhere. You down there. I don't know if they got a Picasso's there in Olean, so ship one down to you. I'll get one myself here to Chicago. Yeah. Get ready for game day. Thank you to Picasso's, our sponsor, as always, and for the entire season. Yeah, we paid the bills. So for Carson, this is Jake. Next week, we'll be back same time Tuesday night. Have a great night, folks.